which I'm very excited about personally, and I'd really welcome this. So please, I'd love to welcome our father-daughter drummers, from what I hear. Thank you. No, you want me here? Okay. Or maybe. Where would you like me? I'll go over here. Yes. Absolutely wonderful. Thank you. Thank you so much for sharing with us. That was absolutely wonderful. Thank you. Oh, you taking? I'll move the drum away. Oh, no. Oh, you can leave it there. Or are you guys headed out? I can see. Okay. Perfect. Excellent. Wow, what an absolutely powerful opening. Thank you very much for sharing with us. This has been absolutely fantastic way to start. Today is a very symbolic milestone for both the BC government and for the Japanese Canadian community. I'm pleased to host all of you here today and to acknowledge Japanese Canadians across the country who may be watching and witnessing our meeting online. The BC government recognizes the significant harm that came to Japanese Canadians as a result of government actions before, during, and after the Second World War. Your community faced horrific discrimination through disenfranchisement, employment restrictions, forced removals, property loss, and violence. And the horrors of the internment camps for thousands of Japanese Canadians is a terrible stain on BC's history, the impact of which is still felt by survivors and their family members. And that's why we were proud to support the National Association of Japanese Canadians to hold community consultations with your members to share your recommendations on ways that we can move forward together. And on behalf of the Government of British Columbia, I am pleased to receive this report coming from you today, and I welcome you to share a few words before your report is presented. Thank you so much. Lorraine, would you please join us? Thank you.
Thank you, Minister Beare. With respect to First Peoples, those of you who are gathered here on unceded and traditional Coast Salish land, and all of you who are witnessing this event through live streaming, I'm honored to present the recommendations for redressing historical injustices against Japanese Canadians in BC, the Community Consultations paper on behalf of the National Association of Japanese Canadians. During the community consultations, we heard from many of our Japanese Canadian community who experienced the discrimination, the forced uprooting, the dispossession and internment. You're going to hear from two of them today. This is deeply personal for our community. Many Japanese Canadian families were longtime settlers in BC, like my family who came from Japan in the 1800s. They were denied their rights, denied education, and forced to endure internment until 4 years after the end of the Second World War. We thank the BC government for supporting us for these community consultations to determine legacy initiatives and measures that would redress the violations of rights and losses. This paper examines what is needed to restore the Japanese Canadian community and to ensure that what happened to us never happens again to any Canadian of any ethnicity or orientation. We have an opportunity to foster positive changes that pay tribute to Canadians of Japanese ancestry and also benefit the BC society as a whole. We look forward to a partnership with the government of BC to implement the measures that were identified in the report. This is fundamental steps towards the reconciliation process with the Japanese Canadian community, and will also assist the province to move forward as a welcoming and inclusive society. Thank you. And now I'd like to call up Judy Hanazawa, President of the Greater Vancouver Japanese Canadian Citizens Association. Thanks, Judy.
I too, sorry, I was running here. I too am acknowledging with sincere thanks that I'm speaking on the unceded traditional territory of the Coast Salish, the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh people. And I also express my respect and appreciation for what I have learned about doing things in a good way upon working with the people in the Squamish Nation over many years, and thank my friend Chief Leanne Jo Shapalamatsiam and husband Tim Manuel of Nicola Lake Nation for being here today. I thank the Ministry of Tourism, Arts and Culture for working with our community to this point, and thank the ministry for being here, for us all being here today. So the consultation question was, what should the government of British Columbia do to redress its history of racial discrimination and unjust actions that devastated the Japanese Canadian community? As part of the consultation process, I was impacted by the recurring themes which arose no matter where our community meetings took place. There was an awareness of the erasure of this community and an almost understated call to reclaim places and spaces where we once thrived. Our communities and our organizations need capacity building, and there was a call to ensure widespread education to fully tell our story in the context of building a more inclusive society. And for me, the need to address our health and well-being has been a focus. This is a story about my family. My family was interned in a self-supporting site at Bridge River, but upon my father accessing a sawmill job in Merritt, my family moved there around 1945. From Merritt, my father sent a typed and courteously written letter dated February 13, 1947, to the custodian of enemy alien property to protest receipt of a $14 check resulting from the sale, without his consent, of family household furniture. My parents had surrendered their new household goods for safekeeping to the custodian a few months after their marriage in September 41. And I was born in Merritt on June 15, 1947, 4 months after he wrote this letter. My parents surely could have used the furniture or a fair cash return, knowing they had a third child on the way. And the war had been over for 2 years, yet bearing the many losses continued to weigh on them. I did not know my father wrote this protest letter until 2017, when the Landscapes of Injustice Research Project discovered it, and I'm proud that he wrote it. But this story is also about the prolonged and unwarranted hardship imposed by British Columbia, which, after engaging in the planned unauthorized sale of their properties and belongings, continued to treat innocent Japanese Canadians like my parents as restricted enemy aliens 4 years after the Pacific War was over. My father resumed his living as a commercial fisherman, and my family moved to Vancouver, struggling to establish their new lives in 1951. For all of us, honoring and preserving the life and culture of a people is a universal human value. And when wrongs are committed against a community, Japanese Canadians, like all people, know there is a need to rebuke the wrong. The wrongs committed by government need to be made visible and addressed. Our Japanese Canadian elders have always stated their stories are told so that no other people will experience what they did. In their honor and for all of us, we need to address the presence of hate and racial prejudice. BC's colonialism dehumanized Indigenous people and marginalized people of color. Inhumanities against Japanese Canadians were sanctioned by the people at all levels of government in this province. We are seeking a way forward so government and community work together to overcome historic wrongs and racialized hate. But rather than eradication, racialized hate is growing. This is not climate change, but the inevitability of breakdown without focused attention and action is similar. There is a real possibility of people continuing to dehumanize one another as natural and life-sustaining resources in the world are threatened. Our stories about what was done to us here and is specific to this province's government and people. And on that basis, it is a powerful lesson, not only in school, but also for others. It can be a catalyst for activating effective, sustained, joint community government measures to research, educate, and fight racism, other forms of hate, and organized hate groups. And for my community, the Japanese Canadian community, there are many things that I think of. There's a need for sustained health care for our seniors, which doesn't transfer and doesn't force transfer of them from one facility to another, because issues like dementia have happened. There's a need to address the fact that our people who are denied an education and who are in their 80s and 90s now may need special help. Their lives were altered irrevocably, and they have had to cope with a change of direction in their lives, which has affected them permanently. I would like my grandchildren to feel positive, comfortable, and familiar about their ancestral identities, including their identity as Japanese Canadians. Our community offers programs to support this, but they must be sustained. I wish my grandchildren and future generations to be attached to a Japanese Canadian community which offers ongoing resources and supports about their heritage. Steps for Japanese Canadians to reject enforced invisibility and reclaim our presence in areas where our communities thrived must progress with honor, acknowledgement, and respect for the people whose unceded territory our historic spaces have inhabited. In addition, as we reclaim areas in the downtown east side where a thriving Japanese community once existed, we are aware today's residents, many of whom are vulnerable, continue to experience displacement and dispossession. Japanese Canadians stand with them because their unjust experience is familiar to us, and it is unacceptable. It is essential to address and overcome the inhumanity of our enforced disappearance, which resulted in permanent community destruction. 60% of Japanese Canadians were exiled from BC and dispersed across Canada, never to return. Japanese Canadian history is shared because it also belongs to this province and this country. Reclamation, commemoration, and being visible in our historic physical spaces support social well-being, not only that of Japanese Canadians, but for others in this province. For my family and for families, we need to address the emotional trauma and social impact evident in our Japanese Canadian intergenerational profile and our relationships between the generations. We have heard community members who spoke of self-imposed shame and silence as ways to contain trauma. In many families, there's evidence of the intergenerational effects of racism and historic trauma. Community members presented this to us during consultations, and in my view, it would be helpful if culturally sensitive, informed therapeutic practice existed, which could be specifically focused upon Japanese Canadian individuals, family, and intergenerational families in need. In closing, finally, thank you to those who are here today, my family, fellow community members, and dear friends. I'm feeling positive that our report is the beginning of significant work between the NAJC, Japanese Canadians, and British Columbia to right the wrongs of the past and to honor the wishes of our elders who have now passed, like Mary Ohara, who repeatedly told her story at public events and schools so that no other people would ever experience what happened to Japanese Canadians. And thank you for listening to me. Thank you.
I'd like to call up Mary Kitagawa, please, a respected elder in our community. Thank you, Mary.
Thank you for inviting me today. And I, too, would like to acknowledge that we are on the unceded territory of the Musqueam, Squamish, and the Tsleil-Waututh people. I'm glad that Lorraine and Judy has given you the background of what we are seeking, but I would like to go a different way. First, I would like to begin by letting you know that I do not like the word internment because, according to the Geneva Convention, a country cannot intern her own citizens. However, today, I will use that euphemism since it has been used for such a long time to describe the Japanese Canadian experience. However, whenever the topic of internment is discussed, we hear only about the property losses, fishing boats, houses, businesses, farms, lands, etc. In that narrative, we seldom hear about the intangible losses which have had a very lasting impact on those who were so cruelly uprooted in British Columbia. A few of these losses were opportunities to seek improvements to their lives, like expanding their land holdings, improving living conditions, or providing children in order to expand their talents. Plans and dreams for a better future were extinguished. Everyone has dreams and continues to plan to reach that goal. Education. To most Japanese Canadian parents, it was a priority for their children. They felt that educating their children would level the opportunity field for them. My parents expected all of us to attend university. In 1942, there were 76 Japanese Canadian students attending UBC that were expelled, thus losing their opportunity to complete their education. In 2012, after 4 years of prodding, UBC agreed to acknowledge these former students with a special honorary degree. UBC, were culpable of not defending her Japanese Canadian students. Retirement. Many seniors, like my grandparents who were retired, were torn away from their comfortable way of life to be enslaved in their 70s to toil in the sugar beet fields. They lived on 200-acre estate in a beautiful 2-level home, which was furnished with beautiful oak furniture. Their farm was now run by their 2 sons and many sponsored Japanese Canadian immigrant men. The productive years. Young couples like my parents lost the most productive years of their lives. Their beautiful 17-acre farm was carved out of a forest. It was providing the family with a very comfortable life. In 1954, they bravely chose to return to Salt Spring Island, where virulent racism was still rampant. They started all over again at the age of 50 and 55. It was not a safe place to be at that time. Community. This was a place of belonging where members felt secure, valued, and comforted. This was a place where members shared activities and made sure everyone was looked after. Language. Japanese Canadian schools were forced to close. In the detention camps, we were discouraged to speak Japanese. It was said that to prove that we were good Canadians, we must speak only English. Freedom. When we became prisoners of the country of our birth and naturalization, we lost our freedom. Friends. I lost the ability to make friends because our family was moved 11 times between 1942 and 49. The 12th move was back to Salt Spring Island in 1954. It was too painful for me to have to say goodbye to the people I knew. Most Japanese Canadians who experienced the incarceration are no longer with us. I was 7 years old when it started, and I am now 85. However, the trauma has been passed down to the following generations. The intergenerational trauma is still a reality today. I yield my 5 minutes.
Thank you so much, Lorraine, Mary, and Judy. Lorraine.
Minister Beare, I would like to formally present you with our report. Thank you.
I want to thank you all for the powerful words that have been shared here today. And I want to thank the National Association of Japanese Canadians, as well as everyone who took part in the meetings, for your contributions to these consultations. We're now going to take the report and review the recommendations carefully and create a path forward. In doing so, we look forward to continuing to work with the National Association of Japanese Canadians on a plan for legacy initiatives that properly acknowledges the hardship and the trauma that people suffered due to government inactions. We know government inactions and actions. We know that changing attitudes and healing the wounds of the past is a long process, and we believe your stories need to be heard so that we can work together to honor survivors and acknowledge these injustices. And I'm grateful that we now live in a province where we recognize diversity is a fundamental part of British Columbia's identity and one of our province's greatest strengths. Across government and together with our partners, our focus on honoring our diversity and acknowledging the contributions of all communities to the BC we live in today. Thank you so much. And again, thank you all for taking the time out of your day to join us. And I believe we're going to take a few moments to do some photos, but I want to thank you for your thoughts and for sharing your stories today. And I'm very proud to be here with you. Thank you.